Hello, Denise Hazelwood here. Welcome back to the JFK Cut and Paste Assassination. This is part 2, where I will address the critics of the Donahue theory, the arguments that Donahue couldn't possibly have been right for various reasons. The main arguments seem to be that, quote, accidents don't get any freakier. No one saw Hickey fire the explosive headshot, i.e., there were no solid witnesses. Questions regarding Donahue's trajectory analysis, the Hiska neutron activation analysis, quote, proving that Hickey didn't do it. The lawsuit filed by Hickey against St. Martin's Press, proving, again in quotation marks, that Hickey didn't do it. And the Charles Bronson film showing, quote, Hickey seated at the moment of the assassination, so therefore he couldn't have fired the fatal headshot. None of those arguments really hold any water, as we will see shortly. The freak accident argument. Freak accidents can and do occur. All you have to do is go to Google and search freak accidents, gun accidents, whatever. My own aunt was killed in a freak accident, so I know that they can and do happen. And gunshot accidents are fairly commonplace. The first thing that came up when I Googled gunshot accidents was this article that gun accidents kill at least one kid every other day. So you can do your own Google search and you can realize, excuse me for that, that gun accidents, freak accidents happen all the time. All right. The next argument was no solid witnesses. First of all, the people who proposed this argument seem to think that someone is going to see a speeding bullet because Hickey was not taking aim. It was an accident. He was falling. So to see him actually shooting the gun, nobody's going to see that. Plus, there were some other issues at hand. The AR-15 had a flash suppressor, which, middle of the day, who's going to see the flash from the AR-15 rifle? And there were, as we saw in the earlier video, witnesses to a Secret Service man falling like he was killed too. Most importantly is a phenomenon that human beings, a condition that human beings suffer from called inattention blindness. Most people were watching Kennedy, not the Secret Service follow-up car. So you can Google, especially on YouTube, examples of inattentive blindness, and some of them are quite entertaining. We're going to take a moment and take a look at one of these examples now. This is from Brain Games. There's the URL for it, and here's the video. Part of it, anyway.
The brain is constantly bombarded by far more information than it can handle. If we tried to process all of it, we'd be completely paralyzed. As a result, we have to attend to only a small part of what's in front of us at any given moment. Sometimes attention can fail and we lose focus. This is what happens in what we call inattentional blindness.
Pay attention. You're about to be tested. For this game, you get to be the referee and judge whether the kicker is able to put the football between those two yellow uprights, 20 yards away. Tracking a small moving object at a distance might be difficult, so watch the ball closely.
Let's hear it. S-E-I-R-I-T, spirit.
So, was the field goal good or not? As the replay shows, it's good. Pretty easy, right? But while you were watching the kick, did you happen to notice which cheerleaders took off their tops? If you're looking for the rewind button, don't worry. We'll do it for you. Yep, there they are. While you were zeroed in on the kick, you missed 3 cheerleaders stripping down at the bottom of the screen. Don't be surprised if you missed it. We took advantage of a loophole in your brain. If you could rewind real life, you'd be shocked at how often inattentional blindness causes you to miss things happening right in front of your eyes. For example, have you ever pulled into your driveway and realized you don't remember a single thing about the drive home? We've all done that. Now, you can't blame your brain for missing the cheerleaders. It was busy doing exactly what we asked it to do, focus on the football. And it wasn't just your brain that had to focus. Your eyes had to do some focusing of their own. In order to smoothly track the moving football during the kick, your eyes...
All right, the rest of the video talks about a phenomenon called smooth pursuit, which we're going to just skip over. You can look that up for yourself. It's on YouTube. I love Brain Games. It's a great show. In addition to inattention blindness and the flash suppressor, and besides the fact that there were witnesses to a Secret Service man falling like he was killed too, we also have the problem that Hickey was hidden from view from many witnesses because there were Secret Service agents on each side of the running board. Now, Clint Hill was already in his dash to the presidential limousine, but Tim McIntyre was right next to Hickey's position, and there were 2 Secret Service agents on the opposite running board as well. So there's that problem. But in addition to witnesses to the Secret Service man falling like he was killed too, we have some ear witnesses who put a shot, quote, right there next to the car, or many who thought that there was a shot from the grassy knoll. In fact, it was from the road in front of the grassy knoll that made them think it was from that direction. And when we get into the acoustic analysis video at some point later, we'll look at the acoustic shock wave and how that affects perception of sound. And remember, we had the gunsmoke witnesses who put the smell of gunsmoke right there at street level, right behind the follow-up car, starting with Senator Yarborough in the car behind Hickey's. And there's medical evidence, the galaxy of stars, the entrance wound size, and other pieces of evidence that are of interest. So the no solid witnesses argument really doesn't apply. We do have witnesses to Hickey falling. We do have witnesses to a gunshot going off in that direction, the grassy knoll. Ear witnesses. We do have gunsmoke witnesses. And remembering again that human beings suffer from inattention blindness. Another argument is that if Donahue got his trajectory wrong, his whole theory falls apart. That's not true. It just means he got his trajectory wrong. It is a logical fallacy to assume that if one part of his theory is wrong, the whole theory is wrong. So I don't like Donahue's trajectory. I do think his trajectory is wrong, but I think he was spot on when he was looking at witness statements and came up with that theory about the Secret Service accident. He just got his trajectory wrong. He accepted the cowlick entry that was disavowed by autopsy doctors. This was the Hiska entry up higher in the back of the head rather than the external occipital protuberance entry that the autopsy doctors described. In addition, he used the Hiska front of the head blowout, and actually that was part of the Warren Commission too, the front of the head blowout, which was not seen by Parkland doctors. So, you know, how accurate that front of the head blowout is, we'll take a look at that in another video. My trajectory is from the external occipital protuberance, the EOP entry described by the autopsy doctors, to behind the ear with no exit for the bullet. Why do I think that? Well, we have a statement here. I'll give you some evidence to the behind the ear trajectory. Nurse Phyllis Hall, who was a Parkland Hospital nurse. I'm going to show you part of her video, her 6th floor museum living history video. First of all, because she uses the word accident when her supervisor told her that the president was coming. So let's take a look at that. Excuse me, I don't have it right centered. There's the URL up at the top. You can see it yourself. This is the Living History with Phyllis Hall's the name of the video.
Supervisor's office was on the Harry Hines side, Doris Nelson. And She had just come back to the triage to tell us that there had been an accident in the motorcade and they were on the way. Well, they were there by that time.
Okay, so an accident in the motorcade. In fact, she uses quotation marks around that. She can't quite believe it because she knows that some of the government story is completely wrong. And so Phyllis Hall is a conspiracy theorist. Not in that video, but in newspaper accounts. Let me see if I can find them. This one is worth taking a look at because she describes a bullet that was lodged in the body. And there's an image from her sixth floor museum interview. Again, she doesn't say this in that interview. It might have been edited out, or she might have said it in a separate interview. I don't know. But she said that there was a mystery bullet which was lodged between the president's ear and his shoulder, which is kind of an interesting place because between my ear and my shoulder is nothing. But she said she saw the bullet while cradling the president's head, and that the bullet was removed and never presented in evidence. So, she also said, excuse me, my computer does not seem to be cooperating quite like I want it to, that this bullet was pointed, more pointed than what we see in the official evidence, and that it was unique. She never saw another bullet like it. So here is CE Commission Exhibit 399. This was the so-called stretcher bullet reportedly found by Daryl Tomlinson, and he described a pointed bullet, which is very interesting. So you can see that the Carcano type of ammunition that Oswald was supposed to have used is rounded, not pointed. However, if we take a look at the NATO 223 rounds used in the AR-15, we can see that, son of a gun, they are indeed pointed. She said she'd never seen another bullet like this, but remember, in 1963, the AR-15 was state of the art, right? Nobody really had seen it to that point very much. So it's not surprising that she had not seen a bullet like that. So, but I said behind the ear. Why did I say that? Here's a statement from J. Edgar Hoover. 2 of the shots fired at the president were splintered, but they had characteristics on them so that our ballistics experts were able to prove that they were fired by this gun. Again, we'll talk about what the gun was in another video. The 3rd shot, which hit the president, he was hit by the 1st and 3rd. 2nd shot hit the governor. The 3rd shot is a complete bullet, and that rolled, misspelled in the source, out of the president's head. It tore a large part of the president's head off, and in trying to massage his heart at the hospital, on the way to the hospital, they apparently loosened that and it fell onto the stretcher. And we recovered that, and we have that, and we have the gun here also. I'm going to talk more about, I talked a bit about the gun from the Shanklin memo in the first part. But here I want to talk about the Belmont memo, which was between, there were telephone calls between Agent Shanklin and Agent Belmont. Belmont was in Washington, Shanklin was in Dallas, and this is what that memo says. Belmont in Washington talked to Agent Shanklin in Dallas. Now there's a handwritten notation that the call was at 9:18 p.m. I'm not sure I buy that. It might have been earlier. But anyway, Shanklin said that arrangements have been made with Carswell Air Force Base to fly one of our agents up to Washington with the rifle that was recovered by the police, together with the fragments of the bullet taken from Governor Connolly and the cartridge cases. Here's the interesting part. I told Special Agent in Charge Shanklin that Secret Service had one of the bullets that struck President Kennedy, and the other is lodged behind the president's ear, and we are arranging to get both of these. I told him to notify us when the gun will reach Washington so we can have the laboratory standing by. Okay, so there's a memo, an FBI memo saying that bullet was behind the ear. And we've got Phyllis Hall saying between the ear and the shoulder. And we've got J. Edgar Hoover saying that there was a bullet that rolled out of the president's head. Nurse Hall said it was removed. But the point being that there was a bullet inside the head, that it didn't exit. Okay. Also very interesting is something that the lead autopsy doctor, Dr. James Humes, told the Warren Commission. He said, quote, "Scientifically, sir, it is impossible for it to have been fired from other than behind or to have exited from other than behind." Well, if it didn't exit and it rolled out of the big back of the head blowout, that would explain how it would have been fired from the rear and exited from behind. All right, let's take a look at Donahue's trajectory. His initial inclination, as stated in Mortal Error, was to, quote, "reject a specific outshoot." But since the x-rays and photographs, autopsy x-rays and photographs, seem to show a cowlick entry and a front-of-the-head blowout, which again was not seen by the Parkland doctors or most autopsy witnesses, Donahue decided to calculate a trajectory using those points, the cowlick entry and the middle of the front-of-the-head blowout. However, his initial inclination to reject a specific blowout was probably, or a specific outshoot was probably the correct thing to do. At any rate, one thing that he did do very well was demonstrate that that based on Kennedy's position in the Zapruder film, frame 212, right before the, wait a minute, 312, that should be 312, not 212, I'm sorry. Right before the explosive headshot, it would have been impossible for a shot from the 6th floor window to create that trajectory. The shooter would have, it was an upward trajectory based on what he could see, and the shooter would have to have been in the trunk of the car. So this is what he did. This was the Warren Commission trajectory, and in order to get that, they had to have Kennedy's head bowed extremely forward. This was the revised Hiska trajectory from the cowlick to the front of the head blowout area, and that's the one Donahue used. Now, I like this entry. This is the one described by the autopsy doctors. I don't like this exit. I don't believe there was an exit. I believe the trajectory was probably something like that, to behind the ear. At any rate, he traced this Hiska trajectory slightly left to right to the follow-up car where he placed Hickey standing up on the seat to create that. In fact, I don't think Hickey was standing up on the seat, nor do I think he was facing forward, and nor do I think he was holding the gun under his arm. I would actually place him facing the rear, as we saw him in the Alkin 6 photograph, which I talked about in part 1. I would have him standing on the floor, not on the seat, facing the rear, with the gun held at eye level, or perhaps higher, because as he was falling, he might have lifted the gun as he fell. And he would have fallen backwards towards the front of the car when his follow-up car stopped to avoid rear-ending the presidential limousine, which had stopped. Again, my entry is in the EOP, the external occipital protuberance, low in the back of the head, as described by the autopsy doctors who disavowed the cowlick entry. There's even reports that the artist who drew the photo created a drawing of the photograph, which I don't even know why they would want to do that, because the drawing was so realistic, was told to make that spot look more like a bullet hole. And my trajectory has no outshoot. It goes from the external occipital protuberance entrance to behind the ear. And possibly the bullet fell out when there were reports that a chunk of Kennedy's brain fell onto the Parkland Hospital stretcher, or Nurse Hall said it was, quote, removed. So it could have been removed by someone at Parkland. But I think it was left on the stretcher when the body was transferred to the casket. And this became the stretcher bullet that Parkland orderly Daryl Tomlinson discovered later. I'll talk more about this bullet in a later video. But anyway, it is a logical fallacy to assume that if Donahue got his trajectory wrong, his whole theory falls apart. It does not. He based that theory on witness testimony or witness accounts just as much as his trajectory. So there is still plenty of other evidence to support his basic premise of a Secret Service accident. Now, Donahue did not equate the limousine stop with Hickey's falling like I do, but that was because he trusted the Zapruder film, and we'll take a look at the Zapruder film in a later video as well. All right, another argument that Donahue couldn't possibly have been right was because of the neutron activation analysis done by the HISCA, quote, proving that Hickey didn't do it because all the fragments had to have come from the type of ammunition that Oswald was using. That's a bunch of bunk. The NAA, the neutron activation analysis, was done on the lead only. The lead was widely variable in content. The NAA analysis has been criticized by researchers far more familiar with NAA than I am. But Donahue knew that any such NAA test done on the lead content would be inconclusive. An NAA analysis done on the jacket material, however, would have been very conclusive, but of course that wasn't done because that would probably have shown that the shot was from the type of ammunition that the AR-15 used. So, in addition to all of that, we have the HISCA who did an NAA analysis. The gentleman who performed that was Dr. Vincent Gwynn, and he even says that the fragments that he used, the lead fragments, were switched. I'll show you his testimony in a minute. But I do want to point out that the Warren Commission had done a neutron activation analysis. That was suppressed. We never got that. They also did a spectrographic analysis, which is a somewhat different test. This is where you take a small bit of material from the thing that you're testing and burn it and analyze the color of the flames using spectrographic techniques. We'll take a look at some of that in just a second. But anyway, when the spectrographic analysis was finally released after a Freedom of Information suit by Harold Weisberg, it was the way it was presented was so meaningless you couldn't tell anything from it. Well, there's a reason why it was presented that way. The Secret Service accident was being covered up. All right, here's Dr. Gwynn's HISCA testimony, and I'm going to read this for you. You have said that this whole process that you go through does not destroy the material. Is that correct? That is correct, this process being the neutron activation analysis. Now then, did you test exactly the same particles that the FBI tested in 1964? Well, it turns out I did not, for reasons I don't know, because as they did the analysis, they did not destroy the samples either. So? The particular little pieces that they analyzed, I could just as well have analyzed over again, but the pieces that were brought out from the archives, which reportedly, according to Mr. Greer, were the only bullet lead fragments from this case still present in the archives, did not include any of the specific little pieces that the FBI had analyzed. Presumably, those are in existence somewhere. I am sure nobody threw them out, but where they are, I have no idea. And the 1964 equipment wouldn't have consumed them either. No. So there we have the guy who did the analysis, Dr. Vincent Gwynn, saying he did not test the actual pieces that were tested in 1964. So going along with this switched fragment, this is a chart that I came up with. We have the commission exhibits, 3 fragments found in the rear of the limo, 2 fragments from Connolly's wrist, 3 fragments from the brain. I want to look at this one here that went missing. Now, Frazier, when he did the tests, he measured in grains, not milligrams, and of course Gwynn measured in milligrams. So I converted the grains to milligrams, and this is the one that went missing. The largest fragment found in the limo floor, which was 58 milligrams and change, went missing. Okay, but look down here. Well, actually, the amount of the weight, if you look at the weight that Gwynn took before he analyzed the fragments, you can see that there's little bits of missing weight, like 11, 12 milligrams, 14 milligrams, 15, something like that. So somewhere between 11 and 15 milligrams taken for probably the spectrographic tests, and might even have been taken to confuse the issue of how much these fragments weighed. But anyway, but down here, when we get to a fragment from the brain, this one, which originally weighed 106, 107 milligrams, lost most of its weight. It lost 65 milligrams of its weight. However, when you look at the weight here and the weight here of the one that went missing, you get something that's closer to these weights of, the bits that were probably taken out for the spectrographic analysis. So that's my own finding, and it's just interesting that pieces went missing, that this much weight was apparently removed from this fragment. I think this is what was switched, and that's probably what Dr. Gwynn was referring to when he was talking about the fragments being switched. All right, another argument against the Donahue theory is the lawsuit argument. That Hickey sued St. Martin's Press, but he waited until the statute of limitations was up. He settled for, quote, a large sum, but actually it was an undisclosed amount. It could have been as little as $1. But there was a twisting of events in the lawsuit document, and Hickey's attorney was Washington's super lawyer, Mark Zaid. So we're going to take a look at some of that. This is the argument. Hickey, who died in 2011, filed a libel suit against Menninger, Donahue, and St. Martin's Press, the publisher of Menninger's book, in 1995. But a judge ruled that the statute of limitations had run out and the case was dismissed. St. Martin's Press later settled with Hickey to preclude an appeal of the dismissal, according to Menninger. There's a couple of errors in that. Menninger and Donahue were not named in the lawsuit. St. Martin's Press was. But we're going to take a look at that lawsuit right now. First of all, know that lawsuits are not always settled for what is true or morally correct, but are often settled for what is convenient rather than the truth. And this suit may also have been settled for convenience sake rather than truth's sake. According to the then chief attorney for St. Martin's, the case is utterly without merit. The lawsuit was utterly without merit. Okay. The amount of the settlement paid by St. Martin's Press was undisclosed as part of the settlement agreement. It may not have been the, quote, huge amount that some Donahue critics think it was. Since the amount was undisclosed, it could have been $1. Who knows? And the point of the suit may not have been to actually recover monetary damages for a victim, i.e. Hickey, who was wronged, but to provide an argument that, on the surface at least, seems to rebut the Donahue theory. So I want to take a closer look at that lawsuit, and here's the actual part of the actual lawsuit document that can be found online. And I'd like to read this. Upon information and belief, in or about April 1992, Thomas McCormick, the chairman, chief executive officer, and trade division editorial director of St. Martin's and SMP, was telephonically contacted by Gary Mack, an archivist for the 6th Floor Museum in Dallas, Texas, who notified him of the existence of a film taken of the assassination by Charles Bronson. The Bronson film, the prior existence of which was known to Donahue, contains images of the assassination, including the headshot of President Kennedy and Hickey's movements at the time. St. Martin's and SMP were specifically informed by Mack that the film absolutely disproves Donahue's theory. Upon information and belief, as a result of Mack's telephone call, an attorney for St. Martin's and SMP traveled to Dallas to view the film. Following this visit, the said attorney, McCormick, Menninger, and Donahue all personally traveled to Dallas to view the film together in or about April 1992. Upon information and belief, immediately following a viewing of the film, McCormick was witnessed as being verbally abusive and upset towards Donahue and Menninger. Upon information and belief, after having viewed the images on the film, SMP, through St. Martin's, nevertheless, and with malice, published the paperback version of Mortal Error in or about October 1992. Okay, let's take a look at this. That lawsuit was filed in 1995, which was after the statute of limitations had run out on the book, which was published in 1992. Hickey, prior to the publication of the book, Hickey was contacted by certified letter to, tell him that this book was being published, that he was being named, and give him the opportunity to respond. He didn't. Donahue, Menninger, and McCormick, who was the St. Martin's Press attorney, McCormick was, were contacted by Gary Mack and did go to Dallas to view the Bronson film. And I believe that they did so with an open mind. And McCormick did become angry, but it was not at Donahue and Menninger. He was angry at Gary Mack, the now late curator of the 6th Floor Museum, for the time and expense incurred to travel to Dallas to see, quote, such a worthless piece of evidence. So McCormick, the lawsuit got twisted around that McCormick was angry at Donahue and Menninger, not who he was really angry at, Gary Mack. Okay, this was confirmed to me by email from Bonner Menninger and Tom McCormick himself, the one who was supposedly angry at Donahue and Menninger. So here's the email from Bonner Menninger sent to me on January 5th, 2015. The claim that McCormick was verbally abusive and upset towards Donahue and myself is completely and unequivocally untrue. McCormick was upset, but with Mack, who had asserted that the Bronson film absolutely, in quotation marks, disproved Donahue's theory when, in fact, it did nothing of the sort. Tom McCormick's email to me said, quote, I have denied before and I deny again that I had harsh words for Donahue and Menninger that day. In fact, I have no recall of Donahue's having been there. He did admit to me that, his memory was fuzzy, but this he was absolutely certain. I did express my exasperation to the Dallas TV man, that was what he called Gary Mack, who had insisted that the Bronson film conclusively refuted the Donahue-Menninger theory. I felt it didn't come close to doing that, and I bridled at having to spend time on a 1,400-mile trip to consider so weightless a piece of evidence. I've always assumed the report of my having harsh words for my colleagues originated with the TV man. And TV man is what he was calling Gary Mack, because apparently they went to a TV studio to view the film. I had already studied Donahue's theory at great length to decide if that theory deserved promulgation, and this included an extended search for info that would disqualify his book. I didn't want to publish another shamefully defective account of the shooting. I'd found nothing that refuted anything Donahue said, and his theory did have the singular virtue of accounting for evidential details that no previous theory could explain. Given a continuing national preoccupation with the puzzles and wild theories about the assassination, I decided Donahue's theory deserved a place in the ongoing discussions. This was an email to me from Tom McCormick himself, dated January 9th, 2015. I'd like to talk a little bit about Hickey's attorney in this lawsuit, Washington lawyer Mark Zaid, who possesses secret level security clearance and is apparently one hell of a lawyer. His online biography on his website says Zaid was named as a Washington, D.C. super lawyer in 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, and 2013, as well as a best lawyer by Washingtonian magazine in 2009, 2011, and 2013, issued biannually, for his national security work. As a National Law Journal once wrote, if Agent Mulder ever needed a lawyer, Zaid would be his man. In connection with his legal practice on international and national security matters, Mr. Zaid has testified before or provided testimony to a variety of governmental bodies, including the Senate Judiciary Committee, the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee, the House Judiciary Committee, the House Government Operations Committee, and the Department of Energy, the Public Interest Declassification Board, and, surprisingly, the Assassination Records Review Board. I did read his ARRB testimony, and I didn't really see anything terribly interesting there. But Hickey's lawyer for this suit was a super lawyer who specialized in national security. National security seemed to be the catch-all phrase that was used to force autopsy participants to sign gag orders. Reasons of security was also the phrase Secret Service Chief Rowley used when he faltered on his Warren Commission questions on the AR-15. I want to take a brief aside for a moment and talk about Chief Rowley's Warren Commission testimony. So here we have an exchange between the chairman, i.e. Justice Earl Warren, and Secret Service Chief James Rowley. So there's a bunch of interesting things going on in here. The chairman: well, I am thinking of this. As you go along in the motorcade, you have men who are scanning the buildings along the way, don't you? Yes, sir. And they have submachine guns in one of the cars. No, for security reasons, I would like to... We don't have machine guns now, sir. I just thought I heard that from the record here that they had some kind of guns. They had a weapon, a new weapon, yes, sir. Well, the new weapon was the AR-15. Well, whatever it is. Now, other people, as they went along there, even some people in the crowds, saw a man with a rifle up in this building from which the president was shot. Now, don't you think that if a man went to bed reasonably early and hadn't been drinking the night before, would be more alert to see those things as a Secret Service agent than if they stayed up until 3, 4, or 5 o'clock in the morning going to beatnik joints and doing some drinking along the way? And you can read the rest of his testimony there. So we've got the AR-15, we've got the late night drinking the night before the assassination, all within the same section of James Rowley's testimony. All right. Going on to that piece of evidence mentioned in as totally disproving Donahue's theory, the Bronson film. So let's take a look at the Bronson film argument. Quote, the Bronson film shows Hickey seated at the moment of the assassination, and therefore Hickey couldn't have done it. That's the argument. But does the Bronson film actually show that? Let's take a look. Here's the particular image of the Bronson film that you can go online and find. I believe this is frame 254 of that film. It's been described as that on certain websites. Hard to see anything from here. So let's take a look at a closer image of that film that you can also find online. And it's kind of hard to see anything there, but we do have an even closer image posted online that we can take a look at of the follow-up car, and here it is. And that arrow is supposed to be pointing to Hickey, quote, showing him seated at the moment of the assassination, and therefore he couldn't have done it. Well, does it really show that? Can you see who this is? You know, I think, and Bonner Menninger says that he believes that to be Agent Glenn Bennett. But very interestingly, in that image, right at the tip of the arrow, we have something here. It looks like a black stick. I'm not even convinced that this is a head. This might be a hand holding the black stick, i.e. the AR-15 rifle. You can't tell anything from this image. Can you tell anything from that image? I sure can't. I can't even tell from that image if this is, quote, the exact instant of the headshot. Bonner Menninger says that the seated agent is probably Glenn Bennett. You can't tell who that is, and I tend to agree that it probably is Bennett. So what is that black stick that I just pointed out there? That's probably the AR-15 rifle. Menninger, I do believe Donahue and Menninger have been honest researchers and have tried to see if this film actually does disprove Donahue's theory. Menninger has requested that the Sixth Floor Museum to let a reputable film company, transfer the film into a high-quality digitized version at no cost to the museum. He found somebody to fund this project. But all his requests to the Sixth Floor Museum have gone unanswered. Remembering that Tom McCormick said that he was angry at Gary Mack, not at Donahue or Menninger, a number of researchers, of critics of Gary Mack, have accused him of being a, quote, disinformation asset. I don't know. I've looked into that. I've done a micro study on Gary Mack. You can read it in micro studies too. And I don't know. There's some argument that perhaps he was a Scarlet Pimpernel spouting the government story while secretly kind of leaking information that disproved the government story. You can read that in my book. But I do think there is some dissemblance here. In fact, I do think that any assassination film showing the first shot would show Hickey seated at the moment of the assassination. Because I do believe that the assassination was the first shot, not the third, and that is something that I will talk about in more depth in a later interview. I do want to talk very briefly about other anomalies in the Bronson film, besides just the black stick at the end of the tip of the yellow arrow there. If you look, you can see that there appears to be some black magic marker streakings in this image. It's just kind of bizarre. But there it is. It doesn't look real. It looks like somebody took a magic marker and went zoop and zoop to hide something that was going on in this image. So, in summary, my responses to these arguments: freak accidents can and do occur. There were no solid witnesses to Hickey's shooting. However, nobody's going to see anybody. Nobody was going to see Hickey taking aim and shooting because he didn't. He fell. It was an accident. Inattention blindness was a factor, but there were witnesses to a Secret Service man falling, ear witnesses to a grassy knoll shot, nose witnesses who smelled gun smoke in the motorcade, consistent with a shot from the follow-up car, inconsistent with a shot from the school book depository window, as we saw in my previous videos. There are questions regarding Donahue's trajectory analysis, but those questions do not discount his accident premise. In fact, I don't agree with his trajectory analysis, but I do agree that he was spot on with the Secret Service accident. The HISCA neutron activation analysis proves nothing, especially since it was done on switched fragments. And there are critics of the neutron activation analysis because it was done on the lead content, not on the jacket content, that are very... the jacket content is conclusive, the lead content is not. The lawsuit filed by Hickey against St. Martin's Press was a twisted version of events. Thomas McCormick was not angry at Donahue and Menninger. He was angry at Gary Mack. The Bronson film shows nothing. In fact, it contains magic marker streaks and a black stick that might be the AR-15. And in fact, if you're going to talk about assassination films, there is evidence that the Zapruder film and other assassination films have been altered or fabricated. In fact, that's my plan for the next video, is to talk about evidence of the Zapruder film alteration and fabrication. So that's it for today. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for future presentations, and I'll see you next time.